Good afternoon. In a stunning legal and political development, the United States Supreme Court has struck down President Donald Trump's signature global tariff policy, only for the president to immediately announce a new 10% universal tariff, plunging global markets into uncertainty. This is a Kenya News Update Today deep dive. I'm your host. The ruling, delivered just hours after President Trump told supporters that tariffs was his favorite word, has created immediate economic and political chaos for the administration. In a 6-3 decision, the conservative majority court held that the president had overstepped his constitutional authority by imposing the sweeping import taxes without explicit congressional approval. The decision invalidates tariffs affecting an estimated $130 billion in annual trade. President Trump's fiery response came within minutes of the ruling being published. Speaking from the White House Brady press briefing room, he called the decision terrible and lambasted the justices who rejected his policy as fools. He then unveiled his countermove, a new, simplified 10% tariff on all imports, which he claims falls within his executive powers. The political timing could not be more delicate. The ruling comes just days before President Trump is scheduled to meet with Kenyan President William Ruto, where trade and investment were expected to be central topics. Analysts now question whether this new tariff announcement will poison the well for those discussions. To understand the scale of this decision, we need to look back. The original Trump tariff package, announced in late 2025, was a complex web of targeted levies. It included a 25% tariff on all Chinese goods, a 10% tariff on goods from the European Union, and varying rates on products from other trading partners. The administration argued these were essential tools to correct trade imbalances and bring manufacturing jobs back to America. The policy was immediately challenged in court by a coalition of business groups, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Retail Federation. They argued the president was usurping Congress's exclusive power to regulate commerce with foreign nations, as stated in Article 1 of the Constitution. The case moved swiftly to the Supreme Court. Now, let's visualize the immediate economic impact. The court's ruling wiped out tariffs on $130 billion worth of goods. For American businesses that rely on imported components, this was a momentary relief. But that relief was shockingly brief, lasting less than 2 hours before President Trump announced his new blanket 10% tariff. This creates a bizarre and volatile situation. A company that just had a 25% tariff on a key Chinese component removed now faces a new 10% tariff on that same part, plus a 10% tariff on parts it sources from allies like Germany or Japan. The business community is reeling. One manufacturing CEO, speaking on condition of anonymity, told us, "It's whiplash. We spent 6 months restructuring our supply chains around the old tariffs. Now the rules have changed again overnight. Planning is impossible." The stock market reflected this confusion. The Dow Jones Industrial Average swung wildly, closing the day down 0.7%, erasing gains from earlier in the week. Sector performance was a tale of winners and losers. Domestic steel and aluminum producers, who benefited from the old tariffs, saw their shares drop by an average of 15%. In contrast, major retailers and automotive companies, which are heavy importers, saw a brief rally that faded once the new 10% plan was announced. The political fallout is equally intense. President Trump's relationship with the judicial branch, once a cornerstone of his political coalition, is now openly hostile. His public branding of Supreme Court justices as fools is unprecedented for a sitting president. This comes after he appointed 3 of the 9 justices currently serving. Notably, 2 of his appointees joined the majority 6-3 opinion against him, a fact he highlighted with particular venom in his remarks. Congressional reaction splits sharply along party lines. Republican leaders have expressed disappointment with the court, but are cautiously supportive of the president's new 10% framework. The court has spoken on the old policy. We now look forward to working with the president on a new, legal approach to trade that puts America first, said the Senate Majority Leader. Democrats, meanwhile, are celebrating the court's check on presidential power while condemning the new proposal. "This is a constitutional crisis of his own making," said the House Speaker. The Supreme Court told him he can't be a king on trade, and his response is to try to be a king with a different crown. Congress will not stand for it. The international response has been one of deep concern and condemnation. The European Union Trade Commissioner stated they are analyzing the new U.S. proposal with grave concern, and that Unilateral measures that violate international trade rules will be met with a firm and proportionate response. China's Ministry of Commerce issued a terse statement calling the situation regrettable and destabilizing. For Kenya and President Ruto, the timing is exceptionally poor. The meeting scheduled for next week was intended to solidify a new trade and investment pact, building on the U.S.-Kenya Strategic Trade and Investment Partnership initiated under the Biden administration. A key Kenyan objective has been securing more favorable access for its agricultural exports, particularly cut flowers, coffee, and tea, to the U.S. market. Under the now-defunct Trump tariffs, Kenyan goods faced a 10% levy. New blanket 10% tariff appears on the surface to leave Kenya in the same position. However, the devil is in the details and the diplomacy. The old policy had a framework for negotiating exemptions and reductions for strategic partners. This new unilateral 10% tax, announced in anger, may lack any such mechanism, leaving Kenya with no clear path to secure better terms. This undermines the entire premise of our dialogue, a senior Kenyan trade official told us. We were coming to the table to negotiate a mutual reduction of barriers. Now the U.S. is declaring a universal tax. What is there to negotiate? Let's examine the potential impact on a key Kenyan export, cut flowers. Kenya is the world's third largest exporter of cut flowers, with the European Union being its primary market. The U.S. represents a growing, high-value market. Under the old 10% tariff, a shipment of roses worth 100 million shillings faced a 10 million shilling tax at the U.S. border, making them less competitive against flowers from South America. With the Supreme Court striking that down, that 10 million shilling cost vanished. But under President Trump's new plan, that 10 million shilling tax is immediately reinstated. For Kenyan flower farms operating on thin margins, this policy volatility is a nightmare for long-term planning and contracts with American retailers. Beyond specific goods, the broader fear is a global trade war. The original Trump tariffs prompted retaliatory measures from China and the EU. This new, simpler 10% tax is even more likely to trigger widespread retaliation because it lacks the targeted, country-specific rationale of the previous policy. If the EU, China, and others impose their own 10% tariffs on all U.S. exports, the global economy could quickly contract. The International Monetary Fund had already projected that a full-scale trade conflict could shave 0.5% off global GDP growth. This new development makes that scenario more likely. Economists we spoke to are deeply worried. This is policy making by tantrum, said one leading trade economist at a Washington think tank. The Supreme Court applied the brakes, and the president's response is to slam the accelerator in a different direction. The global trading system is not built for this kind of volatility. So, what happens next? Legally, the battle is just beginning. The same coalition of business groups is already preparing a new lawsuit to challenge the 10% tariff, arguing it suffers from the same constitutional flaw as the last one. They will file in federal court, likely seeking an immediate injunction to block its implementation. Politically, President Trump has dared Congress to stop him. He is betting that Republican lawmakers, facing midterm elections later in 2026, will not defy him and will instead support legislation to retroactively authorize his tariff authority. Democrats will fight such a bill relentlessly. The outcome is uncertain, guaranteeing months of political gridlock. For the world, including Kenya, the path forward is one of cautious hedging. Countries will accelerate efforts to diversify their trade relationships away from the United States. For Kenya, this may mean fast-tracking the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area and deepening ties with other partners to reduce dependency on the volatile U.S. market. In conclusion, the United States has entered a period of profound trade policy instability. The Supreme Court's rebuke was a historic moment of judicial restraint on presidential power. President Trump's defiant response ensures the conflict will continue, radiating uncertainty across the global economy. The meeting between Presidents Trump and Ruto next week will now be a high-stakes test of whether any constructive trade diplomacy is possible in this chaotic environment. For Kenyan businesses, the message is clear: buckle up. The rules of global trade are being rewritten in real time, not through careful negotiation, but through presidential fiat and legal combat. The only certainty is more uncertainty. This has been a Kenya News Update Today deep dive. Subscribe to Kenya News Update Today for continuing coverage of this developing story.